Hi guys, this is Jeff at Slavens Racing. This video is how to update your Slavens Mule Lucky fork cartridges to a firmer setting. So our Slavens Mule setup is designed for rocks and roots and trail riding and enduro riding, that kind of stuff. But if you're like a hare scrambles guy and you want a little firmer setup, maybe you're bottoming a little too often, or you just want it up a little higher in the stroke, just a firmer setup overall, then we're gonna, from here on out, we're gonna include these shim stacks for you to do that yourself. You can do it before you install your Lucky kit, or you can try it with the way we send it to you, which is what I'd recommend, and then update it later. The AER fork is a little more complicated than the Explorer. The Explorer is very easy. You just have to pull the base valve out of the bottom of the forks and change the shim stack. But the Explorer fork, you have to pull the cartridge, or the AER fork, you have to pull the cartridge out. So this is for the AER, the air fork that's on the XCXCF, SXSXF, and then the same Husqvarna models, FX and FC, TC, TX. So I've got the cartridge already removed. Here's the fork tube, cartridge. You don't have to go inside the cartridge. You only have to deal with the base valve part of it, which is this. So this is just held in at the bottom of the fork with this nut onto here. So I've already loosened this all up. So there's a spring here. This little spring, make sure you don't lose that. This is part of the hook valve system here. And this is the base valve piston. That little spring pushes against this shim here. So that's just basically a check valve for the return flow oil. And if you get, if you drop this or whatever, you get it mixed up, you're not sure which way it goes, the side with the smaller holes goes to the check valve, the side with the bigger holes, and it's a little bit different design here, goes to the shim stack. So I'd recommend that you take a small screwdriver or a awl or something like this. Actually, I think I'll grab it all real quick. Just something like this. Just kind of stick it in here in this hole, then slide this shim stack off. And there's a couple more down here at the bottom. You have to kind of dig out with your fingernail. They get a little stuck on there. There we go. So now I've got them both off. I got them onto the awl. I'd recommend that you take this and tie it up like this with a zip tie, and just keep these for later, because you might want to go back to this setup. And here's how the shim stack is going to come. And I recommend you stick this all through here first, and take your cutters and get that zip tie off of there. Now the stack is ready to go right onto here. Actually, it's not. It's backwards. Let's do it this way. Big shim goes out. Goes on there. We want this side with the bigger holes. Now that goes against this shim. This goes back on, and then you screw that piece back on. So you should clean this first. I use a contact cleaner. You can also use a brake cleaner. Make sure the threads are clean inside this hole. For that I use an X-Acto knife. I get in there and just run it through the threads a little bit. I'm just getting out the old thread locker in there. I'm going to put just a little dab of this on here. You should use blue. I use red. I just use a little bit of it, wipe it off. All right, this is ready to go back together. And this piece has to be centered in the shim so that the shim can move up like this. The shim's got to be able to float. Then tighten this down with a couple of wrenches. It takes a 26 millimeter on this end and a 12 millimeter on this end. There's not a torque spec. These parts are all aluminum, which means they're not as tough as steel. They're softer. So don't get carried away torquing them. You've already put a thread locker on there. Just snug them up and then put this back together. I do not have a video on installing the AER cartridges. They're a little more detailed because you have to pull the dropouts, the piece where the axle goes through. You have to remove those. I recommend you have that done by a professional. And we can recommend people if you don't know someone in your area. But basically, you just put this cartridge back in, and the cartridge is just going to slide back in here. And then you're going to screw this piece in. Yep, I did that backwards. This piece has to go back into here first and be tightened. Then the whole cartridge assembly goes back in, and it's held in with this nut. Then you got your cap and your spring and your oil to put in. Now the spring spacers. You can see this fork has got 3 in it, 1 big one and 2 smaller ones. They belong on the bottom down here. Do not put these up on the cap, because the cap has a place here to locate the spring, to keep the spring located from side to side. You could put a really thin shim on there if you needed to, but for the most part, you don't want to put these spacers on this end. If you do, they'll get into the spring and they'll get chewed up, and then those plastic parts will get in your valving, and then you've got a mess that you got to fix. So just make sure you put the spacers on the bottom. So it comes with a build sheet here. The Slavens Mule is how it comes from us. That's our wood setup. And then this Do-It-All has a stiffer valving setup right here. It says down here 100 to 130 millimeters of oil. I usually start at 120. I think all my bikes have 120 in them. And then it gives you a spring length here, including the spacers. So if you measure the length of the spring plus the spacers, it says 570 and 573 here, but it should be 470 and 473. So if you wanted 5 millimeters of preload on your spring, then you would use a 470 overall length, the spring plus the spacers. That'll give you 5 millimeters. That's what I recommend you start with. I think that's about all you need to know on that. And then guys, put in your fork oil at the level that you like, and it's ready to ride. So this is just a quickie wham bam, because there's really not a lot to this on how to install this kit. It's just a little upgrade, like I said, from our stock setup if you want it firmer. And it's going to be firmer overall. It's definitely going to make it too firm, in my opinion, for most rocks. If you're a AA rider, maybe you want it firmer. It's up to you. But get out and ride, guys. That's all for now. Ciao.